Welcome, speakers and guests. Thank you for listening to our discussion on data privacy and digital transformation in healthcare. Our speakers have a wide range of experience, and we hope that you will find this helpful and interesting. So let's get started. Our first question: COVID has changed the landscape for care delivery almost overnight. Technology is playing a critical role to maintain and sustain some of the most imperative functions in healthcare, both basic and critical life-sustaining, as well as providing a virtual point of human contact during social distancing. So Maggie, can you share what you believe to be the biggest opportunities and challenges around the continued accelerated use of technology as the healthcare industry moves into the post-COVID new world?
Yes, of course. Thank you. You know, healthcare is full of technology already, and we had no idea what we were in for when COVID hit. Ventilators suddenly became scarce. The ability to monitor patients' pulse ox and their oxygenation became impossible. We were short of supplies in everywhere that we were providing care to patients. And so over the last several months, we've introduced more technology in 2 months, I would say, than we typically introduce in a year. And starting with, say, the common iPad, the main thing that we used it for during the COVID pandemic has been communication. Suddenly, patients were shut off from their families and their loved ones. They were scared and they were alone and they were dying. And so we rallied, and thankfully through the generosity of a number of donors and our organization, probably more than 1,400 new iPads were put into circulation throughout our hospitals. We use them for everything from communicating patient to family member, allowing families to have that humanness and be present while their loved one was passing away in our care. Using them for communication between staff members, communication from a team member to a patient in the room. What that would do is we reconfigured some of our tablets so that we were able to dial in and have an automatic pickup on the iPad so that our caregivers could speak to the patient from outside of the room. And this was critical in their care because we didn't have enough PPE. We couldn't keep using PPE every time we wanted to go in and out of a room. We really had to limit that because we had to conserve our resources and think differently about how we provide care. We also use the same tablets for translator services. We use those tablets to connect our patients' technology to allow us to monitor their oxygenation. We repurposed wearable technology that was made for the consumer and used it in the hospital setting after it was fast-tracked through the FDA. So things happened fast and furious throughout this entire pandemic. And what has happened, it's really led to a lot of new opportunities for us. And so as we exit this or flatten out or at least start to adopt a new normal, we have got to maintain the momentum that we've gathered over the last several weeks. And I see that in the necessity to provide care to patients and family members in a way that they want to receive it using multiple modalities of technology instead of now just a phone call or an office visit. Our resources are almost limitless. And so we'll see not only the use of tablets, but our iPhones. We will start collecting our own personal health information, or we will be tracking it throughout the day. We can use it to predict changes in patient condition or personal condition. We can use bidirectional chatting. So we want to get a question answered. We might, instead of calling our hospitals or our providers, we might instead use a live chat system on our computers. Our patient portals and our personal portals are going to be key not only for communication with our health caregivers, but also for things like prescription refills and questions to our providers and getting lab results. We're starting to see secure texting. And now with the COVID pandemic, we can't even have patients come into our facilities until we're ready for them. So people are waiting in their cars, and we text them, it's time to come in for your radiology exam, it's time to come in to prep you for surgery. And so I think we're really starting to see a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation that's happening around the use of technology. Wearable technology is going to just be so part and parcel to who we are, and giving that, taking that technology and using it for good and starting to contribute some of that data back to those registries and areas where people have approved to have their data shared, so that we can learn more about what's happening in communities, what's happening across our country and throughout the world, so that we can start to be ready for the next emergency. Obviously, there are challenges that are associated with this as well. We don't want to slide backwards. We've really rocked the world of our health caregivers. We're now printing swabs using a 3D printer. We are producing face shields on 3D printers, but it doesn't come without its challenges. Cost, resources, fatigue, burnout, all are associated with this inundation of technology. And we have to be sensitive to the human side of the care that we're providing as well. Also, throughout this pandemic, we have seen a loosening of our CMS, our HIPAA guidelines, and we know that those are going to change. We know we may have to roll those back again. And how do we fit the genie back in the bottle, really, after this? And finally, tech adoption, we really have to demonstrate the value. It is costly, but the investment, if done thoughtfully, if you start consolidating where you can and making sure that you're adopting technology that has the ability to be optimized and spread and shared across organizations and health systems and states and counties and countries, all the better. But again, we have to do it in a way that's thoughtful and predictable and sustainable. So I think the future is limitless, and we have tremendous opportunity, but with it comes great responsibility.
The world is in need of fast-tracking a vaccine, cost-effective testing, and rapid turnaround. What is the role technology will play moving forward to accomplish this task? What do you envision will be different with regard to the role of technology in terms of process, regulations, economics, and timelines for these critical pharmaceuticals in our post-COVID world?
So one thing that we've noticed that's come about as a result of this emergency is that nation state activity has actually increased quite a bit. We've had a lot of clients that have dealt with having people come into their network, come into their systems, because they're seeking out intellectual property that's sitting in law firms, it's sitting in pharmaceutical companies, it's sitting in research companies. And as a result of that, we've seen an upstep in the amount of actual attacks, threats, phishing, even simple phishing to try to get into the network. That's new, and that's going to increase. It's going to keep going forward. We're going to see it definitely become more of an issue. We're going to see that nation states, without naming those nation states, are actually trying to take intellectual property that will help them have an advantage in fighting COVID-19 and fighting what's going to come next. And that's something that's new. I mean, we've always had intellectual property threats that are there. We've always had situations where our clients have interesting products, interesting technology, and nation states have tried to find ways to get into that, especially through law firms, which has been a unique way to do it. But we've seen an increase in that from other law firms, from other pharmaceutical companies that have actually had those increases as far as attacks go, and it's become more of an issue. So that's definitely not going to go away.
So one of the real deficiencies that we've seen in the testing market and the ability to get testing out to the people that need it in this environment has really been the kind of anachronistic insurance and payment models that we have in place in the U.S., as well as some real choke points in the laboratories. So in days of old, when what we were dealing with was fairly routine testing, laboratories were reliant on CMS and insurance carriers to really lead what was going to be produced as capacity in their laboratory from a testing perspective. So they really didn't overproduce capacity, because if T was going to pay for it, they weren't responsible for actually having that available. What we're seeing, though, is that now with this pandemic and this need to almost instantly switch on testing capacity for tens of thousands of people a day per laboratory, that model just doesn't work. And so from a policy perspective, that has to shift, as well as a natural bottleneck that's occurring within the laboratories themselves around the intake process. It's typically called accessioning. So if we have tens of thousands of samples all arriving at the doorstep of a laboratory on a daily basis, someone needs to crack open those boxes, pull those tubes out, and associate the paperwork that came with it to some data entry that happens in the laboratory. That accessioning process then creates the work that the lab has to do to process the sample. So what really needs to happen is that accessioning process has to be distributed out to the point of collection so that the laboratories don't become the choke point. It's a crowdsourcing, so to speak, of data entry and an evolution of that whole technology process that really requires a collaboration and coordination among both labs and the organizations that can pull together the network that's required to do testing. So it is a fundamental shift in technology, and it's something that really will live well beyond COVID.
Do you foresee a change in the future around how results are being reported? You know, right now, what I'm most familiar with is we order a test, it comes back in through our electronic health record, and then information is disseminated by the ordering provider. But as you're describing, this is a completely different landscape. And so, you know, some of the folks that we are actually doing testing on don't officially have an ordering provider. We're doing mass screenings. And yes, it's coming back to a provider, but it's coming in through a whole different pathway.
Yeah, I think what will become the norm, we still by regulation need a licensed physician or a practitioner, depending state by state. It could be a pharmacist in a few states, but it still needs to be a licensed practitioner that's ordering these clinical tests. Even if this was direct to consumer, order it from your home through a website, you still need someone who's signing off on the clinical validity of that test. How it's delivered back, however, for COVID in particular, will differ, largely because I think most of this will be driven by employers. This testing will occur mostly to get people back to work. And so there's a consenting and a data sharing that has to happen, which is pretty out of the norm for laboratory testing, with the exception of potentially drug testing, where the results of these COVID tests have to make their way back to the employer so that the employer can assess whether or not those core business functions can come back online and whether certain facilities can reopen. So that is a significant shift in where this data needs to actually go.
Thanks, Scott. I think what you said there about pushing the results collections out to the edge or to the collection agency to eliminate that choke point is something we're seeing across the healthcare systems, where there are new inefficiencies being exposed that people didn't realize before, just due to the amount of throughput that they were dealing. And now that they're kind of dealing with this new process, new way, it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of technology solutions come out to help safely and successfully validate that and allow that to happen better. It's been interesting to see, hospitals specifically implement solutions over the last 2 months that would have taken 6 months to a year to implement, that they now, just because there's no other way to do it but evolve, have changed. So I imagine we'll see that for testing as well. So it'll be very interesting.
Healthcare is moving in a direction of understanding and designing the application of personalized medicine. How do you think COVID has affected this work, and what do you think is the role of technology in testing and tracing as we move into the post-COVID world?
So we think about personalized medicine in different ways. I think most people would think personalized medicine is the use of genetics, right? It's the use of genetics to help steer either diagnosis or course of treatment, largely in oncology. The area that my business is focused on is pharmacogenomics, which is utilizing information about the variances in the human genome to understand what medications would be most appropriate for someone based on efficacy and potential adverse reaction concerns. As we have worked with large population groups, what has emerged in the era of COVID is that these individuals are now empowered with data that is extraordinarily relevant to their health in the COVID world, that others just simply don't have. As it turns out, among the medications that might be used during a standard hospitalization stay or a treatment, a course of treatment for COVID, there are more than 40 medications that have some implication based on genetic variants. So everything from blood thinners to antiemetics to pain management. No cure for COVID, but certainly how we treat those that are going through this process and trying to return to better health can be greatly informed by understanding, what is it about their own genetics that make one particular treatment more appropriate than another. The drug du jour for COVID that Trump has now admitted to taking is hydroxychloroquine. As it turns out, there's a genetic variation that can cause that drug to increase QT prolongation and create heart issues. Now, this is a test that anybody can have done. It's a genetic test to find out whether or not you are susceptible to that particular adverse event if you take that drug. Now, this is not by any means me advocating the use of that drug for COVID, but it's an example of where personalized medicine and those technologies can be brought to bear. One case example that we're working with right now, we do an awful lot of work for a pension fund in Kentucky of retired teachers. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've enrolled about 10,000 retired teachers, individuals that are right in the kind of sweet spot, so to speak, for COVID poor reaction, for mortality events. These are individuals aged 65 all the way up to 2 lovely ladies that are 109 years old. So age is really a proxy for poor outcomes. It's really the fact that as we age, we tend to have more and more comorbidities and underlying conditions that ultimately align to poor outcomes for COVID. What we've done is to use the data from healthcare claims from those individuals, aligned with genetic testing that we've done for them, to really map who among the population is most at risk, who's most vulnerable. Then crossing that to the progression of the disease itself and where these people live, we can produce heat maps of who should we do more concerted outreach to ensure that they really are being compliant with the standard precautionary measures. It's actually quite powerful to reach out to someone and say, we know COVID is increasing in your area. We know that you have these certain medical conditions that put you at risk that is greater than the standard population. We suggest that you really stay in your home, have somebody else do your shopping, make sure you're doing all your hand washing, all those standard precautions that we know are not going to cure anything, but could certainly reduce the potential spread and really put a focus on it for these individuals that is specific to them. But more importantly, with that genetic information, should they actually contract the disease, when they do make their way to the hospital, we can immediately inform those physicians of the medications, the drugs, the treatments that may not work on those individuals as they would otherwise intend them to. So that pharmacogenomic genetic information is really proving a value beyond what its initial intent was, which was essentially to help steer the medications during standard course of treatment. That these people are taking medications on average about 11 medications per person. That's the daily dose for a lot of these folks. but to steer that to the right meds in sort of an average and regular environment. That same genetic information, however, can be used more focused on COVID treatment. So it's an interesting case study, and it's one that, combined with other factors like, we can look at genetics for thrombosis risk. We can look at genetics for nausea on the table during surgery, malignant hypothermia, lots of other things that could be related to the overall treatment. And then ultimately, when we do have a defined course of treatment and potentially even a cure or vaccine, again, is there a genetic anomaly that could cause it to work for some people but not for others? So what we've seen historically in the pharmaceutical industry is, clinical trials are approved if there is a majority of a clinical trial population that the medication performs safely for. Many times it doesn't even have to be overly effective. It just has to be safe. But it really doesn't tell you what it means for an individual. Great case examples out there like Vioxx with Merck, where you had a fantastic drug that did great things for people, but some small population with some genetic anomaly that was fairly rare, that drug actually wound up increasing the incidence of heart events and mortality events. And so the whole drug had to be pulled from the market. As we get better about actually using this kind of testing and using this kind of data, we can more precisely tailor those treatment plans, COVID or otherwise, to the individuals that need them the most.
So Dan, what do you think is the biggest opportunity and challenge to effectively use technology to trace and track disease as well as forecast risk?
Thanks, Susan. That's a tough question. If it's okay, I'm going to focus on really tracing with respect to COVID-19 and tracking exposure risk, which is a particularly complex problem due to the size, and I think is just new to everyone. So related to COVID-19, the challenge is the size of the problem. It's truly a massive pandemic, and it's almost impossible to track through any other means except using technology. There have been some manual efforts via interviewing, et cetera, but they're obviously falling short. It's going to require technology to be part of the solution to really figure out how we're going to do this. Our best opportunity is really, and it's a little bit Big Brother-ish, which relates to our topic here of data privacy, is using our phones or wearables to help to effectively track this disease as it's spread. As a recovering mobile app developer, as I like to say, I know that can't be done by your everyday developer because you require access to low-level systems that aren't allowed via your normal development kits. Luckily, the gorillas in the room, Apple and Google, have stepped up and started to provide the required software to do and build these new applications. Actually, this Wednesday, Apple and Google released software to be included in their next update that will allow apps to hopefully apps that are developed safely and securely, but to track and authorize and alert people who have been who have come in contact with someone who's been diagnosed with the coronavirus. I've spoken with a few healthcare systems who are working to build their own solutions and design solutions like using Bluetooth technology encoded in their badges to track patients and caregivers across the building, who's in what room at what time, et cetera. But when it comes to this kind of pandemic level of tracking, we're really going to need something bigger. So I think it's a really good start what Apple and Google have provided, and it's designed with an idea of balancing both the tracking and the alerting with your personal privacy. But even so, it still presents a lot of challenges. To start, Google and Apple don't work well together. So many exchanges will be missed and or unrecorded. Second, it requires a high level of adoption, which is going to be its own challenge. Since Android has so many different versions, it might take a long time for that update to get out there, requiring or eliminating a lot of the tracking that could be possible. And then even if your iPhone or Android has the ability, you must download the app from whatever provider it is, and then opt in per the principles of the software before it'll start functioning. So it's really going to be a lot of steps to get that tracking to the level we need it. And then finally, even if you do all these things, we must actually trust Apple, Google, and the app developers who built these tools, because now the genie will be out of the bottle. And while this update is supposed to be for COVID-19, who knows when it'll actually be called into effect again, or if it'll truly be removed when this is all over, or how much tracking there will be. So it truly is going to be an interesting balance of data privacy and personal protection and safety for this disease. As respect to, which I thought was a very good question or addition, forecasting, it'll be also interesting to see how, again, now that we are forced to evolve with technology, some of these players can use the data analytics that they're collecting. For example, your heart rate and temperature via your Apple Watch or something along those lines, to kind of see where maybe you can see the start of diseases and things like that. Like, Apple talks about how they saw lack of iPhone usage in certain areas of Hunan, and they could have predicted that something was going on over there. It'll be interesting to see if the large-scale data analytics systems we have, in collaboration with all the data we're going to be collecting as part of this, will help truly be able to be more proactive and help forecast the next time we're going to see something of this scale. At the end of this, while I think we have a really good start with some of the technology that's going to be provided, it's going to be a combination of people, process, and technology to help truly solve this pandemic.
Thanks, Dan. I think much like you, we're looking at mobile devices as really being the contact point here for tracing the progression of the disease. I think we are challenged in all the ways you mentioned, but fundamentally, I think as a society, I'm not sure, given that this really would be an opt-in sort of a scenario, we're going to get the full participation that's required to really truly get the data that's needed. Much like things like drug screening, however, at the office place, if there is some real incentive, some occupational incentive for people to contribute into this knowledge base, that may push it forward. But otherwise, I think we're going to be challenged, given, quite frankly, we have a bit of a conspiratorial nature to some of the American population and politics going on these days. I think the last thing people want to hear is that the government is now tracking their every whereabout. The other thing which we were always challenged with in the personalized medicine world is, creating that separation between the employer and what the employer knows about my personal life and the patient themselves. It would be a little challenging, I think, for me to tell my employees that I need them to have an application on their phone that's running all the time that might give me visibility to where they are or where they go on their own time. And that could be quite challenging. I think some of the other things that we've heard, however, as to how to create sort of hybrid solution there is that we have a persistent application that is mobile enabled that would operate in sort of a dead man switch modality where periodically the application would require some answering of some self-reported information about potentially contact densities and any exposure to people who have had positive results for COVID. That's likely a little bit more swallowable from the standpoint of an average employee population. But I know anytime that we have floated the idea of actual geolocation tracking, it's been met with heavy resistance.
Across the industry, we have seen technology play a major role in changing all aspects of the business and are already seeing its use accelerate moving forward. Now, specific to vaccines, advances in technology are driving the quick development of COVID-19 candidates. For example, as we've seen in the recent news reports, Moderna is pioneering messenger RNA to develop its own vaccine candidate. Technology is also being leveraged to ramp up other capabilities to keep the public safe. In the US, companies like Apple and Ford are converting manufacturing plants to address shortages of ventilators, hand sanitizers, face masks, and gowns. In South Korea, apps such as the Corona Map have been developed so that people are better able to avoid areas where there is higher likelihood to become infected. However, While technology has bolstered the world's response to COVID-19, its impact across the industry should not be overlooked. When you look outside of vaccine development, the impact of technology can be seen in all aspects of the business. Within product R&D, companies are able to leverage artificial intelligence, AI, to accelerate drug development and help scientists understand the effectiveness of exiting treatments through real-world evidence data analysis. So combined with robotic technology, general abilities like 3D perception and real-time motion planning give machines the intelligence to learn how to manipulate new objects that they have never seen before. Even pre-COVID-19, the acceptance of virtual clinical trials by regulators, ethical committees, and institutional review boards was becoming more broadly acceptable. While we aren't a vaccine or diagnostic company, at Novo Nordisk, we are leveraging technology across our entire business to be an industry leader, but most importantly, to reach our patients. Internally, the response to COVID-19, we have shifted many parts of our business to be virtual, including our customer-facing engagements. For example, healthcare professionals are able to order products, samples, virtually in order to initiate patients on our therapies. To keep our employees safe, we have moved over 4,000 employees across the U.S. to a virtual workplace, almost overnight. And we're also looking at what a more permanent shift to a virtual workplace could look like. As a patent-centric company, we also look to technology to help us engage and support our patients. Sophia, Novo Nordisk's new online chat box, it leverages artificial intelligence and natural language processing to help answer patients' questions regarding diabetes. Additionally, we're developing and bringing to the market connected pens to help patients better manage their diabetes. Now, moving forward, we continue to explore how best to support our patients, whether it's through partnerships with technology companies such as Amada or Noom, or helping patients access services that they may need across the value chain. And finally, I'll end by saying that no pharmaceutical manufacturer can succeed in this journey by doing it alone. We must embrace and partner with other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Technological and digital innovation will require us to evolve new capabilities and adapt and be agile in ways of working. But it's this kind of change and disruption that will allow us as an industry to have the greatest impacts on patients and society. Thank you.
Maggie?
So thanks. I really appreciate all your feedback. One of the things that we have found in healthcare is that those same devices that are big brotherish can also save lives. And so for our patients who have come to the emergency room not feeling so well, but not looking bad enough to admit, we're able to send them home tracking their pulse ox. We've heard a lot about patients who seem well, they look well, but their oxygen saturation, it drops very, very quickly and suddenly they're in trouble. And so we have the ability now to place pulse oximetry on them, send them home. The pulse ox runs through the Bluetooth in their phone, and we're able to monitor them back at a remote location. So even if the patient is sitting up and talking and feeling fine at home, we're able to see if they're starting to decompensate, and we can reach out, actually contact them and get them back to the hospital.
So I think this is the great conversation that leads into the question that I have for you, Mark, to share with us. You know, some agencies, and I think we're going to see more and more of this, are requiring, and in some cases mandating, testing of their employees, tracing for COVID-19. What do you foresee are some of the biggest challenges that we need to start thinking about with regard to HIPAA, personal privacy, and what are your ideas around how we should think about mitigating these challenges as we move forward in this post-COVID world?
So thank you very much. I mean, this is the question that I've been focusing on for the past 2 months with clients, with my own law firm, where it's there's a lot of different layers to peel back here. I mean, first of all, there's precedent for this. And I think the precedent is really in two ways. One is we all went through 9/11. We all saw what happened as far as our privacy rights were being eroded, as far as what was happening with FISA courts, with information that was taken from us about us that we didn't know about. And we survived it, number one. It was different. It became something that's become part of our daily lives that we don't think about now. But things have changed as a result of that. The other thing that I just kind of want to keep everybody's mind about is that right now, with the device that's sitting in our pocket or our purse right now, it's tracking us, no matter how you look at it, whether it's from the carrier level, whether it's from us sloppily saying, yes, you can track me everywhere I go, whether I'm using the app or not, whether it's beacons when we walk into a Wegmans and it suddenly starts offering us coupons. These are things that we've all agreed to. This is not new territory. What's different now is that who's going to get the information, who it's actually going to go to. For some reason, we've all agreed that private companies can have this information. That's really what we've agreed to. There's been very little information that goes back to the government, whether it's state, local, or federal, other than them having some sort of subpoena power. But otherwise, we've already gotten comfortable with these private companies having this information. And frankly, most people don't think about it. So let's just kind of set that as the bar of what's already out there. The other thing I want to talk about is actually with HIPAA, what's going on right now. I am not a HIPAA lawyer, but I've dealt with it enough, and I deal with enough clients that deal with it to know that right now, HIPAA is a little bit different than it's ever been. First of all, they've already lifted restrictions when it comes to mobile testing sites. We've all seen pictures on the news, if we haven't been there ourselves, where we see people pulling up in cars and we see healthcare professionals out there administering tests. That is clearly a HIPAA violation. It just is. And we've already seen the Department of Health and Human Services come back and say, that's okay. We're not enforcing HIPAA as far as that goes. The other thing they've said is that right now they're not going to enforce if there's good faith uses and disclosures of PHI by business associates for any sort of public health or healthcare oversight during an emergency while this is happening. That's been very clear. They basically come back and said, HIPAA still exists. It's still something you should worry about. It's still something that's there. But during this emergency, while we're all trying to make sure everybody is safe, they're not going to enforce. And that's a good thing, frankly. It's really what we expect to see out there. But I think we need to stop right now and decide what we talked about before already in this presentation is exactly what attitude we want to take toward this. And I tend to agree with the speakers that have presented their opinions so far that right now, the public health is better than the individual right to privacy. I truly believe that. I think right now that what we need to do is figure out exactly who's being affected by this. Now, maybe not necessarily protect everyone, but protect those that are most vulnerable. And that's what allows us, when we do this tracing, it allows us to do that. It allows us to see exactly what's going on. It allows us to go back and show those people that could be vulnerable what we actually do about it. So let's just keep that as a premise, whether you agree with it or not, but actually start with that. In my opinion, right now, Google and Apple are currently the most trustworthy people, the most trustworthy businesses that are actually going out there and doing this right now because of the way that they're doing it. We all heard Dan talk about exactly how it's going to go through. Well, what they're going to do is they're going to record the information on your device. It never leaves your device, ever. And if there's a situation where you voluntarily self-report that there was a problem, that you're actually tested positive, what will then happen is the people that meet the criteria, which I think is currently within the past 2 weeks, were within 30 feet of you for some period of time, they will be notified that they may be at risk. You won't be identified. And actually, all the information that's collected on your app, on your phone, as a result of that, only lasts for 45 days. There's really nothing more to it than that. So it's actually pretty safe the way that they're doing it. The concern really is, I think, then in two part. It's, I would say, the government, again, whether that's state, local, or federal, but the government's now going to have that information. And the second is employers. I mentioned before that right now we've all gotten really comfortable with private companies having this information about us. Google, Apple, Facebook, whether it's Facebook, whether it's Instagram, whatever it is, these private companies have information about us that often includes geolocation information. That's just what we agree to. If we want to use their service, that's what happens. Now we're talking about the government. The government typically does not track us. They only are able to get to us through subpoena power, to go to a carrier, see where we were if they're investigating a crime, whatever it is. Same thing with the employer. I guarantee your employer right now has written in their employee manual that they're allowed to track you, do whatever they want as when you're using their services, their systems, and their devices. But they don't do it typically. You only see that really in like a delivery service, a UPS truck, somebody that's dealing with some sort of high risk situation where they need to actually know where you are. But for people that work in the office, for people in healthcare, it's typically not where they're actually tracking you. That's changing. And that's why I think people have their backs up against the wall and they feel a little bit nervous about it. And again, for reasons we have discussed and will discuss, that's not really what's happening. That's not really where it is, but that's the concern. As far as HIPAA issues go with these apps, back in 2019, as long ago as that seems, they actually came out and said that it's not a problem. It's no longer it's no longer HIPAA controlled, because once that information has been shared with a third party by you, because you directed that, then the HIPAA covered entity will no longer be liable for subsequent use or disclosure of that information. Unless, of course, that app provider is actually a business associate, but that's a little bit rare and that's not what we're talking about. So there's really no HIPAA issue here. If we voluntarily decide to let an app, whomever is providing it, track us, HIPAA is out the window. It's no longer an issue. It no longer applies. Now what applies is what those companies promise to you, what they say they're going to do with your information or not do with your information. Federal legislation is currently being proposed. Of course, this is America, so there's a Republican option and there's a Democratic option. But what's consistent across both of them so far is that they both have to be opt-in. We have to individually say, we allow our employer, we allow the government, we allow whomever to track us. And the other is, and it's kind of unique with the Republican version, is it says if there's any other sort of less invasive option, where they can actually track you, they have to do that. Where they can actually get information from you, they have to do that. Which of course, as I know a lot of plaintiffs' lawyers are probably salivating when they see that, that means there's a judgment call being made every time. So is it acceptable? Is it appropriate for your employer to have you use an app if you want to come into work? So that way, if the 19th floor has a case of COVID, that they can actually limit cleaning 7 different floors that didn't have a case there, where they can actually see who that person was involved with. That's reasonable. That may happen. But in any event, we're going to see what happens with that. Federal legislation is only in bill form right now. I'm hoping there are some changes, just because from a practical point of view, it's not very effective the way it's drafted right now, but we will see. And then finally, there's a lot of concerns that remain right now. I mean, if we have multiple apps that are going to be tracking us, right now, the way that it works with Apple and Google is it's designated to one federal institution, one federal agency per country that can actually use that technology. So that means, let's say Health and Human Services raises their hand. Then that will be the United States app that can use that technology. That's the way it's currently set up right now. But private companies aren't limited. Price Waterhouse has already come out and they're offering to many different companies the option to track people while they're on premises. Luckily, they're using geofencing. It stops so that if you're out of the workplace, it's no longer tracking you. It's actually not a bad solution from what I've seen so far. But that's another option where there's more data being shared, again, this time with your employer, whom you may or may not trust. But in any event, there are multiple apps that are out there that are going to be sharing this information. What about unintended uses? What about that, not to pick on Price Waterhouse, but they did raise their hand first. What about that Price Waterhouse data, where if there's some sort of subpoena that is served upon your employer to find out where you were at a certain period of time? If you think for a second law enforcement isn't going to try to use that mechanism, try to use that data to find out where people are, you're deluding yourself. And second of all, that's just one example. McCreary Co. could come out with their own app where I track you everywhere, because I think that's more effective. Because I may think you got sick at Walmart, so I want to be able to notify more people. That's the thing that could happen. So far right now it's not, but that's a private use, not a Google/Apple or a government use right now to go that broad. Also, what happens when the data is actually collected? I mean, as we said before, Google and Apple has no sharing. That information goes nowhere except your own phone, and it's very hard to track somebody. It's less effective as a result of that, which I think Dan and Scott both mentioned before. But because of that, you're actually going to have less data that's shared. But it also works by voluntary reporting. That right now, you have to actually go and say, I was sick. I actually now have been diagnosed positively. And that's the way information is actually reported. And there may be some hesitation for that to happen. And I will tell you right now, and again, most of us on the presentation follow this all very closely. There is a lot of consternation right now about whether this Bluetooth is actually more effective than manual tracing. Manual tracing is right now the gold standard as far as actually going in and getting the right information. If you up the tracing to include specific geolocation, to include not only Bluetooth, but also Wi-Fi and geolocation, that's where you're actually getting into the sweet spot of having something that's really accurate, it's really time-based, and you can do it. But that, again, gets people upset about how much information is being shared and exactly how this is going to happen. So while I don't think any of us know where this is headed, I think a lot of us, and I know for me personally, past 2 months, I've read about this every single day, and I've advised clients on it every single day. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know how it's going to end, but it's definitely new territory from a technology point of view. But for anyone sitting here thinking it's actually new territory from a privacy point of view, I think we've actually been ignoring the past 20 years of how this has been changing, and how it's actually not a new precedent as far as having an event like this that's life-changing that actually results in an erosion of our privacy rights.
Mark, that was well thought out and a very good answer. And I completely agree with you on a couple of things that I want to bring up, which is first, while I don't love Apple and Google for all things, I do trust them more to do app development and what they're very good at than the government. And I think, with the government's track record for software development, not to mention caucuses and other things more recently, that's what scares me the most. It's not the technology that's being provided, it's the person who's going to be building and using that technology. And also, I was kind of curious before I signed up with McCreary Corp. In a kind of a similar or parallel experience, I'm hearing a lot of hospitals now, because of the HIPAA regulations have been loosened, implementing solutions for telemedicine, curbside pickup of services, things along those lines, which obviously do not fall under HIPAA when we resume into the next normal, as I'm liking to call it. So I was just curious, how do you see, this unrolling or rollback of some of these improvements that places have been implementing in order to deal with the current situation when, the true enforcement of HIPAA resumes at some point?
I think that an amendment to HIPAA is going to be in the works. I think there's a certain reality that we've all reached right now where we realize in the before times, as I call them, HIPAA made a lot of sense. It was actually, it became something we dealt with as healthcare providers dealt with. We as lawyers advising healthcare providers dealt with. It's changed a little bit. And I think there's going to be a lot more room as far as sharing information, as far as making it available to people and organizations that can protect people as a result of that. I think protection is going to become the new norm. I don't think it's going away. I don't think a lot of the positive things that remain as a result of that are going to change. But I do think that there's going to be a different approach to it. What I will be curious to see if happens if it ends up becoming more of a federal database, which in many different ways, including healthcare to an extent, we've been heading toward, becomes the norm. That terrifies me, frankly. I think that putting a national database at all in place. If anybody that are students of history know, that doesn't end well. And I don't know what that would look like if it actually happened. But I would not be surprised if there's some sort of federal agency that's created or steps up to do that in order to keep the information out of private industry. I don't know that we have the infrastructure to pull that off, but if we do, I could see that something they would try to do. But otherwise, I think HIPAA is going to get weakened quite a bit in order to keep people safe, only for that reason. I'm interested in what you think. I mean, what do you think? I mean, you're closer to it than I am. I deal with a lot of people that touch it on a daily basis, and we've had these conversations.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think, as you mentioned, there's before and now there's, whatever we're going to call it afterwards. But some of these processes that have been improvements that are, I don't know, probably HIPAA adjacent. I think everyone's trying to do the best they can to balance the security and privacy of the patient, but at the same time, it's just not possible. You talked about mobile testing as an example, like that might be something that's now acceptable, or that amendment would then cover. I just don't see that you can put, figure this out and reverse it. As hospitals have scrambled to put so many systems in place in order to support this, I think when they come out of this to say, okay, to run through there and shut down all of these systems is just going to be impossible. So I think you're right. I think it's going to have significantly impacted how we enforce HIPAA. And I think I like how you said it, where, let's put safety first. And as that's obviously the goal anyway, and go from there and figure out how we move forward.
I was going to add one other just food for thought, just going back in time with how we've used information in the past. I mean, I'm going back to the early 80s with the HIV epidemic, and thinking about also other disease states that we have right now where we are tracing and we are tracking, but it's not as robust. I mean, most states have databases where they are reporting sexually transmitted diseases. So again, it's almost like we've opened Pandora's box. And, is the application future state going to be broader? I guess we have to tread forward, but there is also some caution.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more comment to that as well. As we think about it, you're right. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear and desire to protect our information. But what about, in keeping with the thought of HIPAA, getting people to the point that they want to share their data to contribute to the greater good? Can we get ahead of the next pandemic by having more of a sharing of data, more of a predictability? Yes, de-identified, that's going to be really important in terms of privacy, but there's a lot of information and a lot of technology now that really that supports the collection of that information in a way that we can protect our patients and our families and our loved ones, but we can still contribute our information and our data to start to notice trends, start to contribute to the research that's going to expedite the next vaccine or treatment that's going to help our greater population.
Mark, do you have anything to add?
One thing that's become very curious to me when we go through this is figuring out from a labor point of view. I mentioned that there are 2 federal laws that are currently proposed, and they're opt-in, meaning that if somebody doesn't agree to participate in the app, participate in the program as the bills are proposed, you cannot force them. That's new territory from a labor law point of view, meaning that we all know that if you want to work in certain jobs and a drug test makes sense, you have to submit to a drug test. And there's a large body of case law that actually got to that point. I'm curious right now, if either of these laws pass and I want someone to walk back into my business, can I force them to use this app? I think the answer is yes. And I will say if the answer is no, I think there's a fundamental flaw with those bills. Because again, safety first, and I'm a privacy lawyer. I'm in favor of privacy rights. I genuinely am. But I think right now, as these bills are written, somebody could make an argument that if you're going to force me to opt in, it's in violation of a new federal law. I think that's the wrong answer, but I think it's there. I'm curious from I'll call it a personal opinion point of view. And for what I've heard so far, I think I already know the answer, but do we agree with that? I mean, should it be a situation where if you're only tracked while you're at your place of employment, it's geofenced, you cannot be tracked anywhere else, and it makes other people safer? Despite a law saying you have to opt in, can I make a condition of employment that you must opt in? And again, my answer is yes, but I'm curious what you all think from a personal or your workplace point of view.
Personal opinion, Mark, I think I agree with you 100%. I think as a business, my job is not only to increase the shareholder value, but it's also to ensure the safety of my employees and the customers that interact with those employees on a daily basis. So if we have decided, science, healthcare, technology has decided that the safest way to do that is to have a better understanding of the interactions that my employees have had and could potentially be bringing to the workplace, then that's just simply a step we're going to have to take. So I myself would say, as a business owner myself, I would have no trouble, communicating that to my employees in a way that is meaningful to them and their health, but is also in the best interest of the business.
I don't disagree either. I think you're spot on. I will say in the environment I work, which is a heavily labor union environment, we are not even able to demand that people or mandate that people have an influenza vaccine who are working in a hospital environment and coming in contact with vulnerable patient populations. And so I think it's, we're going to be hit head on with those challenges. And going back to something that Marguerite said, I think we have to maybe change the way that we are messaging and get people to think about privacy in maybe a more optimistic, less scary way, to get them to buy in and maybe comply with some of these things. But it's challenging.
I was just going to follow on to that. I assume I'm already being tracked. I mean, if you badge into your building, if you badge into a floor or an elevator bank, whether or not that's being used, that information is available. As you mentioned, our phones are tracking us. I mean, I think, it's all about the usage, and I think this will expose what data is available and how we use it as we come out of this. So, kind of a story close to home, but recently, within the last few years, my father passed away from cancer. He was actually a Villanova professor. And in the time leading up to, his death, we sent his files everywhere, privacy and data and HIPAA be damned, trying to find someone who knew something about it. Someone could learn something from it. Someone might know a new approach. And now, unfortunately, my mother-in-law is also suffering from cancer, which is obviously a terrible disease, but is also filled with people who are highly motivated and willing to kind of work with that data and provide it into groups for diagnosis and stuff like that. So I think we're seeing some of that opt-in, data sharing already, de-identified or not, in certain groups. And I think if it helps prevent and there's something that comes out of this, then hopefully that's one of the areas where that's being used for good in a better way, and people are more willing to opt in and hopefully provide data. Or we find ways, I should say, it'd be great if we find ways to share data easier and more securely coming out of this, so that can expand and we can find, cures for much more than, COVID-19, which would be great. Let's start there, but I'd love to see it go other places.
So for everyone, we have one final question. Given the strong Villanova values that I think we all experienced as students in the Villanova community. How are you using those values and incorporating them into your life, your daily work, especially in this trying time with COVID-19?
Well, I can do it. I'm, as a nurse in the healthcare and service industry of caring, I think the values, the friendships, the relationships, and the academic influence that I received while I was a student at Villanova has carried me throughout my career. I'm always excited when I go to a new organization and I meet fellow classmates or fellow Villanova alumni. There is a true sense of service and caring and commitment to the work that we do. And recently I recognized that in one of the videos that was presented by the School of Nursing, and it showed the faces of Villanova nursing throughout this pandemic. And yes, I'm in the hospital, and yes, I support the people on the front lines, but I'm not at the front line with the patients anymore in my career. And I tear up every time I see the Villanova nurses, because it is an act of heroism to walk into a room, to cover yourself from head to toe in protective equipment, to go in and out of patient rooms all day long, donning and doffing throughout the day, and returning home to take care of your family and going back in the next morning and starting all over again. It is inspirational, and I believe deep at the foundation of the care that I see being provided is what we learned about caring at Villanova.
And would ditto what Maggie just stated. It's that whole humanness that I think we learned as nurses. One of the first things that was the most important of all the tools and all the knowledge that they taught us was how do you translate that humanness. And I think during these times with COVID, it's been really challenging because we are, in a hazmat suit. But I think if you look at the interaction with patients, with all of us today on this call, the amount that people really care and really want to move tomorrow forward is really inspiring.
So I have probably an unexpected answer to this, having both my parents being teachers or professors at Villanova. The Villanova values and virtues have been instilled since a very young age into me. And I do think that has helped me carry forward and kind of directed my life and where I ended up working, and hopefully, providing, I went down that technology path, but still, focused on healthcare, trying to help, trying to make a difference. And right now with the current work and working with, NICUs and, making a difference in these moms and babies' lives and supporting the nurses that do that job has really been extremely rewarding. So I like to think I'm trying to live up to what my parents instilled and the values of Villanova.
At Coriell Life Sciences, when this epidemic originally broke, I pulled my leadership team together, and the question that I posed to them was, how can we contribute? How can we be of service during this time of need at the national scale? And we very quickly knew that what we could do, and we could do fast, was to empower testing at a scale that just wasn't available currently. It's sort of core to our business, is understanding the values that are coming off of this instrumentation in a laboratory, and then translating that and coordinating that insight, making its way into the hands of the clinicians. So we very quickly put out a press release to say that we would work with any lab in the US that was interested in putting together capabilities to do COVID testing, to do all of their laboratory interpretation and reporting at no cost. And so that started right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm proud to say that up till now we've done several 100,000 COVID tests, unfortunately many of which are positive, but those are people being steered in the right direction. But that's something we intend to continue throughout the remainder of this epidemic.
So this is Mark. I will say that when this all started, there were a lot of opportunities for us to have clients reach out to us and try to figure out how can they help. We had a lot of clients that were shut down, a lot of manufacturing clients, a lot of clients that felt that there's more they can do. They can still keep their business operating by responding in a positive way. And one thing that I did initially, and I'm actually quite proud of, was we got a lot of businesses able to get back to work in a safe way, in a socially distanced way, and switch up their manufacturing. Actually start bottling water, actually start creating parts for respirators, actually one client, and other businesses that were initially shut down that it made no sense for them to be shut down, and appealing to the governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and actually helping them. And I will admit, we did not have anyone that came to us actually trying to continue to manufacture candy, which was a famous Pennsylvania story you heard. That was not us. But it really felt good to actually instill those values and be able to continue them through this in a way that benefited others. It didn't benefit the owners necessarily. It really just kept them afloat. It really benefited others. And it was a nice, positive way to spin what we do, and to help other people do better than what they would have been if we were waiting for everything just to stay the status quo.
Well, this has been a great round out for our discussion on data privacy and digital transformation. I want to thank our speakers again, Dan, Doug, Mark, Scott, and Maggie, for helping us better understand data privacy in this digital age, specifically as it relates to the challenges we now are facing as a world with COVID.
Thank you. It's great to be part of the panel and to be back with a number of the Villanova alum.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciated it. Learned a lot and look forward to doing it again if we can sometime. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be on this panel. Look forward to learning a lot from our panelists, and it's great to be here. This was excellent. I learned more here than I ever thought I would. It's nice to see I've met my spirit animals as far as my opinions go. So it's great meeting everyone. I hope the panelists had a similar experience, and I hope everybody listening enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thanks so much for inviting me to participate this evening. This is going to be an interesting conversation. Thanks so much, everyone. This was really a lot of fun. Really enjoyed meeting you all.